Picture this. You're looking down at the most peaceful scene you could imagine. A moonlit night over the Australian coast. The ocean is like glass. Not even a ripple disturbs the surface. But somewhere beneath these tranquil waters lies one of aviation's most haunting mysteries. On June 10th, 1960, 29 people were flying home to Mackay for what should have been a perfect weekend. Among them, 9 excited schoolboys, some just 9 years old. Moments later, the plane slammed into mangrove swamps just short of the runway. Everyone on board was gone. What happened in those final minutes above Mackay? Was it pilot error, mechanical failure, or something else entirely? Tonight, we're diving deep into Australia's greatest aviation mystery. A case so puzzling, it changed how we investigate plane crashes forever. To truly understand what went wrong, we first need to understand the aircraft itself, the pride of Trans-Australia Airlines, the Fokker F-27 Friendship. The F-27 wasn't just any plane, it was the symbol of a new aviation era. Developed in the Netherlands by Fokker, it was designed to replace older piston-powered aircraft, like the famous Douglas DC-3. The F-27 featured turboprop engines, pressurized cabins, and a sleek, modern design. For its time, it was considered quiet, efficient, and reliable. The specific aircraft involved in the Mackay disaster was registered as VHTFB and nicknamed Abel Tasman, after the Dutch explorer who first mapped parts of Australia and New Zealand. This was not just another plane in the fleet. This was TAA's very first Fokker Friendship, delivered straight from the Fokker factory in Amsterdam in April 1959. It was less than 2 years old when it crashed. One of the aircraft's biggest innovations was the use of turboprop engines, which offered better fuel efficiency and less vibration than traditional piston engines. This made flight smoother and more comfortable. In addition, the F-27 came with a pressurized cabin, something not all aircraft in the 1950s had, allowing it to fly at higher altitudes without discomfort to passengers. It was a calm late afternoon on Friday, June 10th, 1960. At Brisbane Airport, the sleek Fokker F-27 Friendship, registered VHTFB and known as Abel Tasman, was ready to begin its journey. This was TAA Flight 538, scheduled to fly north from Brisbane to Mackay, with stops at Maryborough and Rockhampton along the way. The clock showed exactly 5 p.m. when Captain F.C. Pollard and First Officer G.L. Davis guided the aircraft smoothly down the runway, lifting off into the soft evening sky. The first legs of the trip went without a hitch. The aircraft glided steadily, carrying 9 passengers northwards to Maryborough and then onward to Rockhampton. Passengers settled into their seats, unaware of the disaster that would unfold hours later. At 7:12 p.m, VHTFB touched down safely at Rockhampton Airport. Here, the crew took a brief pause, not just to refuel, but to prepare for the final leg of the flight to Mackay. The weather report brought a note of caution. Meteorologists predicted shallow fog patches around Mackay, a common and sometimes treacherous condition in Queensland's humid climate, especially as the night deepened. The aircraft was refueled with 700 gallons of fuel, enough to extend the flight all the way to Townsville if the fog made landing at Mackay impossible. The crew was confident. The F-27 was designed to handle challenging conditions, and this was just a routine precaution. But it wasn't just fuel and weather forecasts that changed at Rockhampton. The passenger list grew. Alongside the 9 who had boarded in Brisbane, 7 more adults and 9 schoolboys climbed aboard the plane, all boarders returning home for the Queen's birthday long weekend. These schoolboys were from Rockhampton Grammar School, filled with the excitement and chatter of their journey home. In total, the aircraft now carried 25 souls, including the 2 experienced pilots and cabin crew. At 7:52 p.m, under a clear sky and lit by a full moon, Flight 538 lifted off from Rockhampton Airport, climbing smoothly to its cruising altitude of 13,000 feet. The journey to Mackay was short, just under 300 kilometres, expected to take only about 45 minutes. But what no one on board knew was that on the ground in Mackay, the weather was changing fast. At 8:17 p.m, just as the aircraft neared its descent point, Mackay Air Traffic Controller, EW Miskell, radioed a troubling update. Fog has rolled in over the airport. Mackay is temporarily closed. Captain FC Pollard, calm and collected, responded immediately. He announced they would hold at 13,000 feet, circling over Mackay while waiting for visibility to improve. The plan was simple. Wait it out. The Fokker had the fuel, the crew had the training, but the skies had a different plan. By 8:40 p.m, the crew reported they were directly over Mackay Airport. Below them, the coast was eerily quiet, bathed in moonlight. The sea was calm, the air was still. To the untrained eye, it was a peaceful night. But to the crew, a dangerous layer of low cloud clung to the coastline, just thick enough to obscure the runway on final approach. 2 attempts were made to land. 2 approaches aborted. Each time, Captain Pollard brought the aircraft around and back into the holding pattern. He wouldn't risk the lives of those on board by attempting a landing he couldn't see. Time passed slowly in the control tower and inside the circling Fokker. Minutes turned to hours. Then, finally, at 10 p.m, a break. The fog was thinning. Conditions were improving. Air traffic controller Miskell grabbed his radio. Visibility is improving. You may attempt another approach. Captain Pollard acknowledged. This could be their window. Miskell then called the airport fire service for a final weather reading. The ground temperature was reported at 55.4 degrees Fahrenheit, about 13 degrees Celsius. Miskell radioed the data to the flight crew, but this time, there was no reply. He repeated the message. Still nothing. VHTFB, Mackay Tower. Do you read? Silence. Again he tried. The clock ticked to 10:05 p.m. No answer. At 10:10 p.m, with fear setting in, Miskell initiated search and rescue procedures. Somewhere in the darkness below, 25 souls had vanished from the sky, and no one knew exactly when, or how, or where. What followed was one of the most intensive search operations in Queensland's aviation history. At approximately 3 a.m, June 11th, a motor launch equipped with a searchlight glided slowly between Round Top Island and Flat Top Island, 5 nautical miles east of Mackay Airport. Then, piercing the darkness, a chilling sight, floating wreckage, pieces of passenger seats, scraps of clothing, and fragments of the cabin interior, bobbing in the Black Sea. There were no survivors inside, and worse, no sign of the aircraft's fuselage or wings. The horrifying discovery triggered the deployment of HMAS Warrego, a Royal Australian Navy survey ship, to search for the sunken wreckage. The ship arrived in Mackay waters on Sunday, June 12th, equipped with sonar and diving teams. By 4:20 p.m. that afternoon, after hours of scanning and patience, the team made a heartbreaking discovery. Lying 40 feet below the surface, just 4 nautical miles southwest of Round Top Island, were the major sections of VHTFB. It had crashed only 3 nautical miles southeast of Mackay Airport. So close, yet never seen. Over the next 2 weeks, divers and salvage crews painstakingly recovered the remains of the aircraft. What they found was devastating. The aircraft had impacted the water at high speed. There was no attempt to ditch, no evidence of control. All 29 lives on board were lost, including schoolboys, parents and crew returning home for a quiet holiday weekend. A nation mourned. This was Australia's worst civil aviation disaster at the time, but one question remained. What exactly happened in those final, silent moments? The physical evidence had been pulled from the sea. Now, it was time for investigators to piece together the final seconds of Flight 538. On 29th July 1960, more than a month after the devastating crash, the Australian government announced a Board of Accident Inquiry to investigate what had brought TAA Flight 538 down into the sea with no warning, no distress call, and no visible signs of mechanical failure. The inquiry was chaired by Mr. Justice Spicer of the Commonwealth Industrial Court, a man known for his attention to detail and unflinching demand for clarity. Investigators were first given weeks to sift through the shattered remains of VHTFB, painstakingly examining twisted metal, cracked instruments, and personal items soaked in salt water. On 4 October 1960, the inquiry officially opened in Brisbane. Over the next 6 weeks, it would hear testimonies, examine evidence, and question experts in both Brisbane and Mackay. But as the inquiry unfolded, it became clear this was not a typical accident. The aircraft had been in perfect working order during its earlier legs from Brisbane to Rockhampton. Weather conditions near Mackay were challenging, but not beyond the limits of the Fokker Friendship or its experienced crew. So why did the plane suddenly descend into the ocean? No emergency had been declared. No mechanical failure had been reported. No last-minute maneuver had been detected. The board could not determine any single cause of the crash. Investigators zoned in on one instrument that may have sealed the fate of everyone on board: the altimeter. Specifically, the three-pointer altimeter installed in VHTFB. This device had long been criticized by pilots and psychologists alike. With 3 separate dials for thousands, hundreds, and tens of feet, it demanded a high level of precision under pressure. But studies, including a 1949 report by W.F. Grether in the Journal of Applied Psychology, had already revealed that errors of 1,000 to even 10,000 feet were not uncommon with these altimeters. Even skilled pilots could misread them in the stress of descent, especially at night, over water, in fog. Was it possible that Captain Pollard, despite his vast experience, misread the altimeter, believing the aircraft was higher than it truly was? The board considered 2 theories: a mechanical malfunction in the static pressure system or altimeter, falsely showing a safe altitude, or a misinterpretation of the three-pointer display, leading to an unintended descent straight into the water. Either would explain the lack of a distress call and the lack of evasive action, but both were difficult to prove. The altimeter, like much of the cockpit, had been badly damaged in the crash, and with no flight data recorder, black boxes were not yet mandatory, there was no way to reconstruct the crew's final decisions. As investigators struggled to pinpoint a definitive cause, new theories emerged, some technical, some unexpected, and one deeply unusual. The mystery of TAA Flight 538 refused to give up its secrets easily. While studying the cockpit wreckage, investigators stumbled upon something strange, something that didn't belong. A small brown glass medicine bottle, nestled among the shattered panels and burnt insulation. It caught the attention of John L. Watkins, Director of Engineering at Trans-Australia Airlines. Watkins, a man with a reputation for deep analytical thinking, couldn't ignore the oddity. Why was this bottle in the cockpit? Watkins proposed an unconventional theory. Perhaps one of the schoolchildren, enthusiastic about flying, had been allowed into the cockpit during the earlier cruise phase of the flight. A common practice at the time, and maybe that bottle didn't contain medicine. Watkins speculated it may have held model aircraft fuel, a chemical mixture with strong, volatile fumes. Could a spill of these fumes inside the enclosed cockpit have distracted the crew, clouding their judgment, impairing concentration, or even causing brief disorientation? It was a theory that could explain an otherwise inexplicable descent. Not mechanical, not environmental, but human and tragically avoidable. But the theory remained unconfirmed, and in the absence of chemical testing or eyewitness testimony, it became one more thread in the fabric of uncertainty. Another theory came from Frank McMullen, one of TAA's most experienced technical engineers and a key figure in the Fokker F-27 program. McMullen believed the crash occurred during a third attempt to land, a decision made after 2 earlier approaches had been aborted due to fog and low cloud. This time, McMullen suggested the pilots may have chosen to fly just beneath the cloud layer, using visual references over a calm sea to guide their descent. But on that moonlit night, the sea wasn't ordinary. The ocean surface was what pilots call a glassy sea, a mirror-like reflection of the sky above. With no waves, no shadows, no contrast, it becomes almost impossible to judge altitude visually. As the crew began their final turn to align with the runway, they may have thought they were safely above the water, but they weren't. McMullen theorized that the left wingtip clipped the ocean, causing an immediate, catastrophic loss of control, sending the aircraft crashing into the water. It was a tragic misjudgment, not of equipment or skill, but of perception in a deceptive environment. While the inquiry was unable to declare a single cause, its findings and the many theories explored led to real change in aviation. One of the critical recommendations from the Board of Accident Inquiry was a call for all large passenger aircraft, including the Fokker F-27 and larger, to be fitted with flight data recorders. Until then, flight data recorders, what we now call black boxes, were not mandatory. Their absence in Flight 538's case left investigators blind to the aircraft's final moments. In the wake of the crash, aviation authorities around the world began to rethink safety standards. Improved cockpit instrumentation, enhanced altitude awareness, and a new emphasis on flight data recording became the foundation for a safer future in commercial aviation. But for the families of the 29 people lost, and for a nation still in shock, the official report offered no closure. Instead, it left behind a haunting collage of theories. A misunderstood altimeter, a spilled bottle of fuel, a glassy sea, and a fatal illusion. The skies over Mackay have never forgotten what happened that night. More than 6 decades have passed since TAA Flight 538 vanished into the calm waters off Mackay. In that time, aviation has transformed. Technology has improved. Safety standards have tightened. And yet, some questions still echo in the silence that followed the crash. Was it a faulty instrument, a misread altimeter, a fleeting moment of distraction, or simply nature playing tricks on even the most experienced of pilots? What do you think happened that night? Share your thoughts in the comments below.